Okay, so I wanted to talk about this book that I got. It's by Brett Baer. It's called 3 Days in January, Dwight Eisenhower's Final Mission. And I want to talk about a few things in here, specifically in chapter 9 on the military industrial complex. Okay, so there's a couple things that I want to go over before I tell you what's in here, before I go over what's in here. Okay, so the things that we need to know is that, first of all, you have a civilian military, and that's called the militia. Okay, they're made up of the private people in the Confederate States. The Confederation was not replaced, the Articles of Confederation were not repealed by the Constitution. They exist together, and there's some touching on that in Eisenhower's quote here in his speech. So he acknowledges that. Okay, so the United States are the federal areas created for the purposes of creating a military force. Okay, and the Confederation are the states that are free, sovereign, and independent. So if you read the Articles of Confederation, it says that the states are and shall remain free, sovereign, and independent. So those independent states got together and they created a federal government to oversee some federal areas, which are the dependent states. So you have Articles of Confederation, independent, Constitution, which is an amendment to the Articles of Confederation, which are the dependent states. Okay, so anytime it talks about the United States controlling a state, it's talking about the United States federal government controlling its dependent state, or its military areas, or its military. Now, the way that you become a citizen of the United States so that you can go to Congress, to the seat of government, is that you have to be usually selected by, in some states they make different laws for themselves, you're selected by your state legislator, and then you go and apply to the district court of record, and then the judge approves your citizenship to the United States. And that's how you became an officer on federal lands, a citizen of the United States working for the federal government to start your time so that you can become a representative at the seat of government. So you left your independent state under the Articles of Confederation and you applied, and then you were chosen to become a dependent on federal lands in a dependent state, a citizen of the United States working for the federal government. Okay, so you have Confederation, Articles of Confederation, an independent state, and then you have the military, and that's under the Constitution, called the United States, and those are dependent states. Okay, so Baer writes, the size and structure of the military had changed in dramatic ways since the vision of a civilian military, that's the militia, was first imagined by the founding fathers. I prefer representatives of the Confederate States. As Ike took office, he was aware the nation could not rely on typical peacetime concessions that would weaken the military and leave us vulnerable. But military expansion came with consequences to the entire principle of the civilian military. During his administration, as he would later write, in the making of every military budget, my associates and I did our best to achieve real security without surrendering to special interests. Now, what he means by a military expansion came with consequences to the entire principle of the civilian military. So the civilian military was supposed to be called in only during wartime, during an act of an invasion to one of the states or several of the states or America in general. So then the militia would be called into actual service and would be conducted under or ordered under the president acting as commander-in-chief, Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution. So now we have such an enlarged military that we have something called enlisted people, and they are serving 24/7. So he says military expansion came with consequences to the entire principle of a civilian military. So why do we need a civilian military if you have people serving 24/7? So that's the consequence. It's enlarging. It's enlarging government. It's enlarging the system. It's enlarging the power of the federal government. Let's see. Ike viewed himself as the guardian of a permanent peace, and yet this other force, this military industrial complex, that's the military and the corporations working together, was selling a different vision to America. When consumers opened their favorite magazines to see pictures of a Titan missile, they saw the nation's emphasis on the weapons of war enabled by rhetoric, which is persuasion or propaganda, on the campaign trail, warning of a missile gap. Rhetoric, we find it everywhere, even in the court opinions. It's just persuasion, it's propaganda, it's legal fiction. Ike says it sent the wrong message, seeing all these pictures of bombs and missiles in these magazines that are picked up and read by housewives and merchants. Ike thought, quote, down the long lane of the history yet to be written, end quote, he would state in his farewell address, quote, America knows that this world of ours, ever growing smaller, must avoid becoming a community of dreadful fear and hate. That's the circling negative that Ike was warning us about. Circling negative. The military industrial complex is going to circle negative. I did a video on that. It was hypnosis and circling negative, and how circling negative puts so much what he calls dreadful fear and hate, or just fear and anger and anxiety, makes you sick. It causes health problems, okay? That's well known and been known for a very long time. I read a book about it that was written back in the 1800s, okay? So the dreadful fear and hate, and be instead a proud confederation of mutual trust and respect. So the president is the executive officer, that's Article 2, Section 1 of the Confederate States, and he's the president, Article 2, Section 2, Commander-in-Chief of the Land and Naval Forces of the United States. So he's executive officer of the Confederate States, the independent states, and he's the Commander-in-Chief of the Land and Naval Forces of the United States. Now, he also says something about Washington, that Washington was afraid this would happen. I don't know why, if they're afraid it's going to happen, why they don't put things in the Constitution to keep it from happening. They didn't put anything there to help stop it, obviously, because this is where we're at. Let's see. Ike had been agitating on this topic for years, and although one might think it was distinctly modern concern, brought on by the advances of science and technology, that's the military-industrial complex, Ike was intrigued to find a similar concern expressed in George Washington's farewell address. Washington urged the young nation to avoid the necessity of those overgrown military establishments which under any form of government are inauspicious to liberty and which are to be regarded as particularly hostile to Republican liberty. Balance was the theme, both for Washington and Eisenhower. Okay, so a problem that we've had for a long time, and I wanted to talk about this because yesterday, which was Friday, like the 25th of February 2022, someone that I watch regularly said that America will never be free, will never be what the founders wanted it to be. It just never will. And that kind of really struck a chord with me and made me sad, because I think that everyone deserves to be free, sovereign, and independent, just like the Articles of Confederation guaranteed to our states, and then through them guaranteed to all the private people of the states. So I wanted to just give you more information on what I've been talking about for over a year now, and that Bret Baier from Fox News wrote about this on his information on Dwight Eisenhower, who was also a friend of John F. Kennedy, who also talked about the secret societies, the people pulling the strings of the military-industrial complex, and how important it is to understand the way things were intended to be and how they are not that way. I see people all the time saying, America has fallen, America's falling, America's, and it's not America, because America are all the private people. It's the United States that is falling. It's the military-industrial complex that is falling, and I think it's because they've gone way so far away from nature, and nothing can live without nature. Nothing can live outside of nature. You have to stay in nature, and they have overexerted themselves monetarily, hypothetically, in every way you can imagine. They've overextended themselves, and so they've gone way beyond what nature will allow, and so it's going to pay the consequences for it, and it is probably going to die off. But that's the instrument that America uses for its war efforts. The United States is a dependent state, which is an instrument used by the Confederate States as a war power to protect us. And it was intended to protect us from mainly the British, but really any invading force. So what they did was they've propagandized to us and said, well, we don't even have Articles of Confederation anymore because the Constitution replaced it and repealed it, which is just a lie. The paperwork that shows that it was an amendment, of course, they've just taken it out of the federal libraries and the federal books when they copy the handwritten congressional records and put them into the bound books. They just take it out. They just don't print that part. And I think it was March 6th and March 11th of 1782, I think, when they talked about how the Constitution would be an amendment to the Articles of Confederation, specifically Article 1 and Article 8, which talks about the United States Congress assembled for military purposes, as opposed to United States of America and Congress assembled. So you had both, because one created the other. America created the United States, its land and naval forces, and a seat of government to regulate them, and the private military, the civilian military, the militia. Okay, so just more information from Fox News' Bret Baier on Eisenhower and what he's saying, and then Eisenhower referring to George Washington, who had the same concerns. And this is what I've been trying to teach everyone who watches my channel for the last year or so. And so it's just another mark for us in our progress towards going back to freedom, liberty, sovereignty, and independence. So I think the biggest thing that people need to do, besides learning and becoming aware and knowledgeable, is getting some gold and silver, stacking it as much as you can, because the dollar appears, by all accounts, and I'm not an economist, but I listen to a lot of people, and they say that it's going into the trash. And so if you want to be able to take care of yourself and take care of your family, then we need to have something. And Gold and silver is not regulated by the federal government, okay? There are people out there who are trying to tell you what needs to be done, who's still not telling you the entire story. They don't want to tell you that the Articles of Confederation still exist. They never went out of existence. The Constitution is an amendment to it. It's not a completely new government. It was just a government for the dependent states, which are the federal lands for military purposes. Okay, so enough for now. And like, share, subscribe. I have a project. The project is for you and me to go out this weekend